Welcome to the last session of the PIPC Breakaway sessions. And for those who don't know me, my name is Jason Wang. For our next topic, the adoption of real-time payment systems, lessons from India, Thailand, Singapore, and Brazil. And to lead our discussion, we have Mpho Siddiqui, our moderator, the Chief Product Officer at BankServe Africa. Next, joining him is Wiza Jilakazi, Director of Africa Market Development at eBanks. And lastly, Zubin Tafti, Managing Director of Payments Transformation at PwC. Thank you, everyone. Let's give them a warm welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and good afternoon. I figured this will be a popular discussion, so thank you for joining. Before I even start, there is an announcement I need to make. There's somebody who dropped their AirPod. So when we're done with the session, just one. You can come and collect it here. You just have to prove that you've registered for PayShap, and we'll give it to you. So I think it's an interesting discussion that I want to lead today, and it's going to be a conversation. And of course, we've got the Slido app open that you'll be able to raise any of the questions that you have. And I'm quite excited that for a change, the questions won't be raised to me. There's enough people in the room, both on the floor here and also in the gallery where they can answer some of the questions. So please do raise them. We'll make sure that they get answered. I think for me, this discussion around the adoption of real-time payments is quite an exciting one in the sense that I think for South Africa, we achieved a significant milestone this year with the launch of PayShap. And I think leading on from various market launches across the globe, I think at last check, there's probably well in excess of 40 real-time payments instances across the globe that have been launched. And South Africa is one of those. And I think for us, we've launched it with very high ambitions of adoption and taking lessons from what happened in other markets. So I'm really keen to hear from the team what they've seen in other markets and how do we translate what we've delivered thus far from a PayShap perspective, where we've now cleared over 2.5 million transactions since launch to get to a point where, similar to these markets, we can easily say we're doing well in excess of 1 billion transactions cumulatively over a year or something like that. So maybe I will ask the two panelists to just briefly introduce themselves, and then we'll get into the meat of the discussions. Yeah. Just the organization you represent, and
sure.
Yeah. Zubin, maybe we start with you. Yeah.
Mpho, thanks for that. Good afternoon, everyone. So Zubin here, as I said, I'm part of PwC, based out of India, and as part of my role there, domestically, I look at all the work that we do with clients which are in the non-banking space. When I say non-banking, this would include paytechs, fintechs. We have a lot of them in India. So working with them, and also then looking beyond that in terms of working with various industries, so retailers, airlines, all of that to implement payments. That's one part of my role. And the other part is the one that has got me to South Africa in the past and keeps getting me back, is all the work that the team that we have does in international markets. So we've done various roles. We played various roles as part of the PayShap in the initial design. That was RPP at that point in time, and we've also worked on various projects here domestically with a few banks and pass our PIB transition and things of that sort. So happy to be here and share the insights from the Asian side of the world. Of course, India, Singapore, and Thailand, and happy to share our insights and take any questions that you'll have.
Wiza?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. I'm Wiza Jalakasi, Director for Africa Market Development at eBanks. At eBanks, we're a global payment processor, serving predominantly very large global merchants to connect to local payment methods in emerging markets in the global south. We're present in 29 countries, and I'm the Africa guy.
The Africa guy in Africa. So taking that, then maybe we jump into, I think, as the first question for me, and I'll start with you, Isa. Maybe just your observation really around how and the role of instant payments or real-time payments in driving digital payments adoption. I think there was a very good discussion next door earlier that spoke around the role of cash and, of course, finding that intersection between, the continued usage of cash and driving adoption of digital payments. So maybe your thoughts, both from a global and an African context, yeah?
Yeah. So I think it's really tricky to compete with cash.
Yeah.
Cash is extremely convenient. It is ubiquitous. It's easy to move around and much unlike any other digital payment method. But I think if you start to look at the business benefits, the instant availability of funds is a very key driver. And I think a lot of the digital payment methods were not focusing on this real-time element. Now that we are seeing more focus in this space, it creates a very strong incentive. In markets like ourselves, where crime is an issue, I was astonished by the statistic of over 400 cash and transit heists, right? You do realize that that's like
more than one a
2
day.
or 3. That's actually really, really crazy.
Yeah.
And then access.
Yeah.
I think like what products or services does the payment rail enable a consumer to have access to that they wouldn't have access to otherwise? That starts to be a very interesting driver for the adoption. I do think that at the end of the day, speed and convenience are the things that matter the most. And of course, cost. I think cost is a really, really, really big one. When you look at M-Pesa, has been extremely successful in Kenya, but it is one of the most expensive peer-to-peer transfer methods that's available on the continent. And I think there's something to be learned there. And for us here in South Africa, congratulations again on the launch of PaySharp. I think it's a very promising start, but there's still much to be done to really get it to where it needs to be.
And thanks for that. I mean, just talking about the number of heists that happened in the country, I think on Saturday, there was 3 reported over a space of a few hours. So it was about between 11 and 2 p.m. So, so I think it's important that we drive this narrative of digitizing payments, right? And look at cash as a form of payment, and how do we start driving use cases that displaces cash, but with digital convenience and instance in mind. And Zubin, your thoughts on that same question around just the role of instant payments in driving digital adoption? I mean, because it's a very wide topic, but relevant across all markets. Yeah.
So I'll refer to one of our studies that we did last year, which was globally looking at, it was payments 2025 and beyond. We're looking at overall what are the transaction trends in terms of digital transactions across the globe, and we've estimated that the 1 trillion odd transactions that happened in 2020, which will become at least 3 times, over 3 trillion by 2030. So that's a 3x growth in digital transactions. So, and of this, a very large portion, more than half, will come from real-time payments.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is the real-time payments and why, right? I think you touched upon it, the value prop, right? Earlier, it was the part about instant. And in today's day and age, when we put up a post, we want instant gratification. We want everything to happen right then and then and
we
now.
want the likes,
So you want the likes. So I think that instant ability, which wasn't there in the previous Rails, is there. Yeah. I think you talked about it's easy also, although it's not clunky, there are no numbers, you have proxies, you can use existing fields that you have for customer, maybe mobile numbers, things like that. And of course, you mentioned about cost. I think by design, this rail is designed to run at a lower cost. It doesn't have very complicated chargeback, representment, those kind of flows. It's limited. It's designed to be more or less straight through, right? Yeah. Real time. Yeah. There's less back-end batch, recon, that kind of stuff is limited. So by design, it's designed to be low cost. So therefore, it brings in the ability to do cash displacement, right? And of course, cash is assumed to have no cost, but we all know that there is cost. There is a cost at the back of it. And I think one of the other driving factors that I see is this multiplier effect. Once you start converting a cash transaction to a digital one, there is so much more that can be done. For a bank, those transactions never hit them. They never had those balances with them. Yeah. Now they get those new balances that they didn't have. That's one big. A merchant or a small business who did cash business had no digital trails and therefore had no credit history, didn't have any financial standing, could not get a loan, could not do anything. So I think once you're bring in these merchants which are doing cash transactions, I think there's a big multiplier effect for a financial institution to make money of various other ways. And that's, I think, one of the key things that I'm looking at how this will be driven.
Yeah, and I think that last point it's quite important. And I know you'll probably expand on it when you share some of your experience on what you've seen in the subcontinent continent market, because I think a lot of us are grappling with this question, especially in the South African market, around besides the ability to do the instant payment, what is that multiplier commercial case? And I think it's maybe you want to hold that thought, because that's something that as an industry we continue to deliberate and really unlock, and probably that's what's driven the initial approach around a more traditional pricing approach to how this payment rail was launched. Now, and probably a lot of questions that, and I don't want to answer it, and I'll probably put it on you. I've had so many people coming to me and asking, it's that. I think the number one question is, when can I get access to the specs? And the second one is, when can I participate? So it's so happened that I also have this very same question that, and I want you to think of it both in the markets that you guys have experienced in, have observed, just the role of the regulator in not only promoting the deployment of a real-time payments instant, but also the role in driving adoption. Just your thoughts on that, because I think it's also a very important question that as South Africans or in this market we continue to debate and grapple with.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe Wiza, you wanna?
Yeah, absolutely. I think in the massively successful cases that we've seen, Brazil as an example, Nigeria as another one, the regulator played a very fundamental role in getting that success across. So looking at Brazil specifically, they began consultations in 2018 with all of the financial institutions of different sizes to say, like, hey, we want to build this URail. How do we make it compatible with all of your systems? So it was a very consultative approach in the actual design and development of the system, which made it very practical to capture all of the needs of different various players across the stack. And then apart from that, it was also the simplification for onboarding. So the mechanism that PIPC uses, PIPC is the name of the real-time payment rail in Brazil, is a PIPC key. And your PIPC key, you can basically register a bank account or a mobile wallet connected to your PIPC key through your CPF. Your CPF is your tax ID, equivalent to the national ID card that you have here in South Africa. They made it very easy for somebody to link their PIPC key to any of their payment methods that they want to use for that rail, using only their phone number or their tax ID. So it made it very, very easy to get set up, but there had to be a special dispensation from the regulator to allow onboarding of customers in this way, which previously didn't exist. You also see something very similar in Nigeria with the BVN, which is an 11-digit identifier that you can pop into any app and instantly open a bank account. I know the compliance people are a little bit, but it's the regulator at the end of the day that takes that information,
the bold decisions,
and makes it possible. So I do think it's absolutely critical to see that success. Last Friday, PIPC did 168 million transactions in one day. That's according to the head of PIPC at the central bank. So it's this wasn't here in 2020. It's really impressive growth, and you can see the role that the regulator had to play.
And maybe, and I'll come back to you because I see you've jumped into the details of just how adoption was driven in the PIPC system, and you've covered regulators' role as a start. Maybe do you want to just cover some of the key lessons you've picked up within the PIPC ecosystem, and I look at the very impressive numbers that have been shared there, and I do still dream that we will get to the billion transactions within PayShap. And possibly, and I don't know if Dave is here. He spoke about I think last year in cash they moved over 1.7 trillion in value of cash. Hopefully, we'll move that in real-time payments sometime. So maybe you want to just cover a little bit of that before I jump back to Zubin.
Yeah, sure. So I think building on top of that, the first point is, you do need to have the regulator and the central bank support, and they need to be the champion driving the development of the rail. I think it also helps that they are, from a market perspective, seen as a neutral intermediary to facilitate the interoperability across different financial institutions. Number two, I think, is making enrollment easy. So the tax ID, CPF, BVN, whatever mechanisms exist. I think here in South Africa it can be very easy as well with mobile numbers. A really great thing that the Central Bank of Brazil did was generate a lot of brand awareness towards consumers around PIX as a payment method that is sanctioned and approved by the central bank for different types of transactions. So this is really important in societies like ours that are relatively low trust, in a sense, and having that stamp of approval from the voices that matter really goes a long way to driving that. Finally, I think incentive structures work really well. So incentives for users, so low cost, cash back, that really drove that initial uptake and has been really instrumental in getting that adoption this far.
Okay. And Zubin, just maybe going, was there anything you wanted to add?
No, that's just that.
Going back into the regulatory, the role of the regulators, just your thoughts there. And then I know you've also captured a few slides that you want to share with the audience around just some of the lessons from. So maybe let's start. So your thoughts on the role of the regulator, and then I'll jump into that slide. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I think it's imperative that the regulator, and not, at least in India, I've seen not just a regulator, the entire government kind of, came forward and backed it up. Whether it was ensuring that pricing was kept low, whether it was nudging and pushing participants to come on board and, adopt it. Whether it's our prime minister or the foreign secretary or in conversations that are happening either at the G20 or anywhere in the global stage, they talk about UPI and a digital public infrastructure and how it can help change an economy and giving the Indian story, and willing to share that or have it being adopted. So I think that ability to not just support it, and if a central bank is invested and is driving the agenda, they tend to, remove whatever hurdles will come, whether it is on compliance, whether it is pushing people to adopt, whether it is trying to reduce price or making or setting a standard set of rules or experience to be able to ensure that adoption is driven. So I think that's an important role that they play. And if they're in the driver's seat, it kind of helps play that role a lot better to kind of uptake adoption. The other one big thing I've seen in governments, and this is across India, Singapore, Thailand, is they tend to become first adopters. So whether it is the initial subsidy payments that they want to either push out, or whether it is various government ministries that are accepting payments from citizens, they first enable it at those points, and they tell customers. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, I think Singapore was the one where they said that. Sorry, not Singapore. It was Thailand, where they said that if you register your, PromptPay ID to receive a tax refund, you get it instantly, as compared to someone who chose to get it maybe after a few months. Yeah. So the incentivizing adoption through whether it's a tax refund, whether it's giving disbursements, so become adopters themselves, and that's one, I think, a great way in terms of showing the trust in it and saying that we're adopting it. So I think that's one, and this doesn't happen only at the central bank; it's the larger government, the ministries, all of those come together. Yeah. So I think that's one other big thing I've seen play out.
So that holistic government effort from regulatory, and all the government machinery, really looking at the real-time payments as a national asset to unlock economic value. So, and I think that's a great takeout for us to also consider. So, I mean, when I look at the numbers from from the Asian market, really, I'm amazed. I mean, I had the opportunity, and I'm still grateful for that, to spend some time with you in India in May. At the time, doing 10 billion transactions in a single month was still an objective, right? And I understand has already been surpassed.
Last month we did around 11-ish, close, just about short of 11.
Just to give you guys a sense of just the numbers in that market. So maybe you want to just, for those that don't understand the various instances of real-time payments in the subcontinent, and really, of course, with your, the focus on the Indian market, just give a sense to the audience what has been good. What are some of the key takeaways that have been picked up from that? Yeah.
Absolutely. So I think the numbers you can see, and I don't want to go on talking about them. Very big numbers, and adoption. Obviously, if you see in India, is huge. More than half of the GDP. That is $1.5 trillion odd dollars went through it last year, and a lot more is going to go through it this year. Similarly, you see Thailand. Thailand also, in terms of adoption, the number doesn't look comparably big, but if you look at the population and if you look at the size of the GDP, it's a huge adoption.
Yeah.
If you look at per capita transactions, Thailand is actually higher than India. Per capita is around 20, 23 transactions, whereas India will be around 8-ish. So per person, if you look at that, and that's also because if you look at on the right-hand side, right, the number of active users, India still basically got 30% of the population using it. We still have a long way to go, or headroom to be able to adopt, or make a lot of other people adopt it. Whereas in the other countries, you'll see almost 80, 90% of the people have adopted it, at least have generated an ID and maybe use it once in a while. So that's in terms of where we are in terms of the adoption numbers.
And just before, do you have a sense of? I mean, 8 months since we went live?
Yeah.
Was the picture similar in terms of percentage adoption? Maybe you closer to the Indian market.
Yeah.
What percentage was adopted in that sort of first year or two
I
of
think
the rollout? Yeah.
First, see, we had some tailwinds which supported us, at least in India.
Yeah.
One big one was demonetization. Yeah. In that month, it jumped, I think, 4x. Then we also had, another driver where NPCI, which is the operator that built the rail, also came up with a front-end app, which was the Beam app. Now, and they did that because while they told the banks to, build their own apps and put it out there was inconsistency, or banks didn't know how to do it. So, NPCI took the first step and say, this is what good could look like for you, and actually developed an app on their own, and they put it out there. And the reason why they could do it is, in India, we have this totally interoperable store of value linkage ability. So you don't have to own a store of value to be participant in the system. You can only be a payment initiation participant. And that's what NPCI did by putting out that app. So I think I've covered more or less the government side of it. So I think the other, key broad themes that I've seen is the ability to be inclusive and interoperable. I think the inclusivity from participation, there was a lot of non-bank participation today from a transaction initiation perspective. In India, the Google Pay, the Phone Pay, and the Paytm, almost 90% of the initiated volumes are from them. Well, of course, the store of values, the money is moving between the banks and the accounts within the banks. But the initiation layer is there. So the ability to get them in. And what they did is, they not only how did they manage to initiate so many transactions? Yeah. They spent a lot of money. Billions of dollars went into marketing, went into cashbacks, so they're willing to invest, willing to put money, to be able to acquire customers, and especially customers who may not have been acquired by banks, low-end, low-value customers, and that's something that they did, which also helped kind of drive the adoption. Yeah. The other part is in terms of the structural model, right? Participation of non-banks was one key area. The other was, I talked about, the store of value interoperability, the ability to de-link the participant who initiates the transaction and the store of value that gets debited. So I can download an app from Google and link any of my accounts within any bank that I have in the country.
So is this the so-called payment authorization message?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that ability is unique to India, and I think that's one of the key success factors there. And of course, then it comes to standardization. In Singapore, we have the SGQR, which I think played a big important role. And of course, getting all the banks and the NFIs in. Then I talked about pricing. I think across this, you will see that there's some kind of a standardization, and it's usually lower than what existing rails are. In India, at one point, it was an extreme, it was nil. Yeah. And it's still more or less nil, except for a few new use cases. Yeah. It may be, drastic to move from, up there to nil, but I think it has to be lower than maybe whatever is the acceptable standard within the country, and that's the pricing point to be at. Yeah. In fact, if you look at prompt pay in Thailand, when it came out, there was a pricing regime that was set out by the regulator saying, up to 5,000 baht, nothing, and beyond that, it was tiered pricing. But one of the banks said, you know what, people are going to break up transactions and just put it on there. It doesn't make sense, and so you know what, I'm making it free for everyone. Within 48 hours, every bank followed suit, and ever since it's been free. Yeah. So even if the regulators gave an option to price, banks decided that it may be, but transaction fee model, and I think that's one point that, at least in India, because by design the prices was kept low, the ability to make money out of various other services that could be provided around just payment acceptance or transaction processing was, I think, a very innovative way in which a lot of people dealt with it. I'm sure you'll have heard of the soundbox innovation.
We saw pictures of it in other forums. And for those that are interested, I think on my LinkedIn, we just have to go, because apparently I'm very active and I post a lot. You'll have to go quite far back. There's a video that I did.
And I'm the actor in that.
He's the actor doing the payment. And yeah, it was quite a cheap payment that we did on an informal merchant. And again, just showing the upside of what you can do. So there's a number of questions here, and the section we needed, what I wanted to go into was around just your guys' observation on the South African market. And I looked at the questions. A lot of them are directed to me, but I think I'm too smart to fall for the trap. So I will twist them around to really, because I think the idea here is to learn more from those that have been observed other markets and really share those learnings with ourselves. So I think the one question that and really talks to the rollout of real-time payments into, and it was from Anonymous, into the retail ecosystem. I think the way I would want to put it, because I think the question is, when are we seeing it in South Africa? Maybe the question should be different, is in the markets that you guys have operated, observed, and I think you spend a lot of time both in subcontinent and also from a Brazilian perspective, is how have you, what role did, retail, person to merchant, use cases play in driving the 4x, 5x, 10x acceleration of real-time payments? So maybe some of your thoughts and the various use cases in that ecosystem. Yeah.
Sure, I can maybe go first, and I'll talk about India. So today, almost 60% of those volumes of 11 odd billion that happened last month was P2M, merchant payments. It was not P2P. Initially, yes, of course, P2P was the first use case, but merchant payments, and these are the small ticket cash displacement payments. I believe initially when we built the business case also, cash displacement is key. If you're trying to further acquire a merchant who already has 10 modes of payments and this is just an add-on, fine, you could do it, then the argument is, will it cannibalize, right?
Yeah.
But I would say there are many merchants out there that don't have digital acceptance, and getting them to accept is the real business case for everyone. Yeah. I think the Soundbox was one clear innovative. Why did a merchant who didn't accept digital choose to accept digital? What is the use case? So one is, of course, he does no more, the amount of time he took to take money and give back change, he spent maybe 60 seconds for each of those transactions. He could have spent doling out, let's say, his vada pav or his chai or whatever it was. So that much time of his got saved. Why could he do it? Because he just told the guy, pay me 10. He scanned the QR and he just got an audio recording and in language of his choice, telling him that much money is received. So he didn't have to bother taking money, counting change, giving back, none of that. He didn't have to, at the end of the day, understand, count all his money and know how much did I get paid. He didn't have to do that because at the end of it, he had a record of this entire earnings for the day. He had to place an order for his next day supplies to somebody at night after banking hours, after usually, you don't get, or you have to go physically, and then he could place that order on his phone because he's got funded, and he could place an order for supplies that he needed for the next morning. So this is what a merchant that didn't have digital payments now had an offering. And therefore, I keep saying, find the value prop for these merchants that work well for them. They will adopt. I think it came up in the cash conversation about, tax evasion is the unsaid force that sometimes, pushes. I think a lot of these merchants don't hit the tax bracket. And even if they do, and that's another area where the government can come in and say that, if your turnover is about X or up to this turnover, if accepted digitally, you would not have to pay tax, or you would have a much lower rate, let's assume.
Yeah.
So even that could be managed through regulations or rules. So I think that ability to find the use case for these merchants, which today are predominantly cash, to be able to, adopt or get them within it is really helpful.
Yeah. And Wiza, your thoughts on, on that question?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, and I'll follow it up because there's two that are linked to that, and I want to ask them differently. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think definitely the merchant ecosystem has a very big role to play. It's amazing the stuff that I've seen in India. Like, first of all, no device, just the QR code, and then you have like a smartphone app that speaks the amount that has been paid to it, and you can then make that way more accessible to people who might not be literate, for example. I think just the extent to which India has gone has been very, very fascinating. In Brazil, it's been a similar story as well, but it was also strongly influenced by online e-commerce.
Okay.
So today, the number of PIX key holders exceeds the number of credit card holders in Brazil by 40%. And last year, PIX was responsible for 21% of all online purchases. So they brought in like a new audience who otherwise might not be willing or able to spend online because they're familiar with the mechanic of how to make a PIX transaction. That started to grow adoption as well in the online vertical. In the offline world, a lot of work was already done to allow people who might not be formally registered as business to accept business payments and to be able to almost reconcile between their personal wallet and their business wallet. So with the same PIX key, you can have up to 5 different accounts linked to it, and you can sort of like select which is the default or which is the one that it goes into under certain conditions. And that allowed merchant acceptance to start relatively rapidly. And it's only been around for 2 years, and it is increasingly becoming more relevant and starting to displace not only cash but cards as well. So I think that it's quite obvious that the merchant space plays a key role. What is interesting to see is how will South Africa do it? I already feel like I have too many ways to pay for something in South Africa, and try to check out and take a lot. Fantastic experience, but there's like 8 different payment methods. How do you consolidate that into a unified experience that still gives you that same optionality, but is much simpler for small businesses to use? So I think that could be like through distribution. I mean, the number of speed point terminals or the Yoko machines. QR codes, I think, are still, they haven't really reached their full potential in South Africa in terms of the applications, but having perhaps a standardized format that runs on top of the PayShap rail could be an interesting way to drive that.
Yeah, and I've always found that South Africa it's unique in its own case. And I think the two questions. So if I listen to the Indian ecosystem, low value merchant, straight through credit push with some innovation around how you manage the merchant experience from the, if you think about a payment device, the POS device is a confirmation of trust, right? So it provides that trust that says I got paid. Now the voice recording or that is also a form of confirmation. Now in South Africa and then Brazil e-commerce is what drove it from a P2M perspective. One of the discussions, and I want to hear your guys' thoughts on these two concepts. Again, I'm flipping the question. So the one question came from Stuart and the one was anonymous. The one talks to, and I want to couple them. So request to pay as a product feature. How do you guys see it playing a role in driving P2M? And secondly, unlike the two markets you've referenced, there is a big appetite in this market around high volume person to merchant retail ecosystem as opposed to the men in the street sort of type corner shop merchant. Your thoughts on that as key unlockers for volumes in South Africa? So do we need request to pay as a question? And secondly, is real-time payments a need, a must in high volume retail?
Right. So I think it's really like dependent on how you implement the experience, right? Because now you're competing with, I pull out my iPhone, I double tap, I get my face scanned, and like, that thing is sweet to use, It's nice. So if you now bring me an experience where I have to like type in some numbers or something, that might not be elegant. But if there is some way of the merchant being able to capture my identifier and send me a one-step, hey, do you want to pay this amount or not? That starts to look very interesting. I think even in the large retail space where, those types of consumers are the ones that have optionality. And, it's even better if you can, start to layer some additional financial services on top of the payment method. So here here in South Africa, I see a lot of buy now, pay later that has been implemented very elegantly into the payment method, right? So you've got like PayFlex, etc. Something like that, I think, could be a key driver, but it depends on how you implement it, for sure.
So that they call it the two-step process, right? So the Apple contactless, it is two steps. You click, you tap, and you get confirmation, right? And I guess that's the challenge to the audience in the room. When majority are the designers, they're the people that are going to bring a request to pay to live. Is how do you simplify that experience in line with existing payment rails? And Zubin, your thoughts? And looking into P2M, I know you hold very controversial views around request to pay, and I've asked that question deliberately to get a different sense, right? We can't always all agree.
Yes.
So, and I think the thoughts around high volume retail, and it's been spoken a lot in the conference. I think there's a huge appetite for this in our high volume retail ecosystem. Yeah.
So, I think the one question was RTP and will that unlock volumes?
Yeah.
Right. My short answer is no. And I'm telling this from, well, I've not studied all of the 40 live, but we've researched a lot on a lot of them. None of them have seen a major spike from volumes because request to pay was the driver. It wasn't that. It's a great feature to have. There are specific use cases where request to pay works well. Let's say it's a bill collection with your bill details that go along with it. And a person looks at it, oh yeah, okay, bill looks fine, pay. Those kind of use cases is great.
Yeah.
But is it really a volume unlocker? I would think, I haven't seen that as a real driver. And to your point, where you also talked about the Apple Pay experience, who makes the first action? Who takes out his phone? Who scans his face? Who says tap? It's initiated, while I know the back end, the request comes from the merchant and to the issuer and all of that, but it is the experience of the person who's wanting to pay because he knows he needs to pay for a product or service that has been delivered and he's happy with whatever was given to him, and he's initiating the payment. I'll give you two examples, and they're part of the countries that I'm looking. One was India, right? I think in India, request to pay got launched. There were a few cases. In fact, there was some negative fraud started happening because it was the first time India saw request to pay. People confused it with a payment, inward credit coming. So there were fraudsters that, called up people and say, you know what, you won a lottery, blah, blah. I'm just doing a check transaction, just authorize this. And they send a request to pay, pulling money out of them instead of they think they're receiving money. And a lot of people fell for that. Thailand launched request to pay. They thought it would unlock a lot of volumes, but there it was considered like, this is like a collection service, means, it's money that I'm supposed to pay, but I haven't paid and it's late. So therefore, I'm not happy with it. And it didn't drive adoption. So these are some two, points. So I believe request to pay has its use cases, and I believe it should be part of the toolkit. Whether it is going to, be the multiplier effect for volumes, I would err on saying possibly no.
Yeah. And I guess what I'm sensing from you guys is that the blue sky is still open for South Africa to truly define the high volume person to merchant use case, in the sense that not a lot of documented implementations in the various markets, and it's something that South Africa can latch on because we do drive a lot of our payments volume, digital payments volume, out of high volume retail, both cash and card. So it remains an opportunity, and just picking between the questions I had and learning how to multitask multiple digital devices, and at this point I'm doing quite well. I guess, and I'm also looking at the time, is just, again, your observation onto the South African implementation. What has worked, what hasn't worked?
Okay.
There is no one, they are recording, so you can. Yeah.
So I've been part of the initial journey, and I think it's South African phrase also is, it takes a village to raise a child.
Yeah.
And I think, this initiative, that this village of banks coming together and raising this child, I think I've seen that as a great experience, unlike it in other places. So I think done great, raised this child, brought it up, but I think it's time to, open it up. I think there's one thing a couple of things I've seen. One is, of course, participation from non-banks. I think that you need to figure out a model that works for everyone and crack it, because it's important that they need to be bought in. Figure out a model. I mean, you have the commercial constructs, you have a licensing regime. Yes, all of that needs to be figured out.
Yeah.
It just can't switch on overnight.
Exactly,
But a model needs to be figured out where they can help and they can participate. I think the second thing is a common experience. Today, I saw a couple of apps I was seeing from my colleagues, show me how it works, what it looks like. Very varied experiences. Very varied experiences. In India, the experience is, yes, the part about how you find your beneficiary may be different, but the authorization screen, the confirmation message, the logo branding, that building of trust happens when there is consistency irrespective of which bank you use, at least for certain elements. I'm not saying, it's not outside the competitive domain of you having convenience, but I think some consistency in experience is I would say, a second thing which needs to be looked at and worked on. And I think get that P2M cash displacement use case going. I've seen that happen everywhere. In India, it started off with that, is this transaction-linked business model, business case. It will only take you so long, so far. Over time, we've seen everybody starts making payments, not from payments, but off payments. So think of a model where you're providing a valuable service to I talked about that merchant, right? You're giving him all of this and tell him, you know what? For this, I will charge you an X fee for a month. And it doesn't cost, it's a QR print, right? That's it. That's all you give him. He doesn't need a point of sale. He doesn't need a fancy device. He doesn't need to generate, dynamic QRs, whatever it is.
It's there.
Yeah. So just give him that and get those people within to be able to accept and use it. I think that will drive a lot of adoption. Get that P2M use case solved for. I think there's a QR standardization piece that needs to be looked at. And I think that is where it'll unlock a lot more volumes and unlock a lot more value for even financial institutions from a business case standpoint. Now you can build in lending, you can build in a lot of these use cases, financial services, cross-sell, upsell other services to them, which we've seen a lot of financial institutions do, and that model seems to be the model that will progress. I'll give you one data point. It's a large global payment aggregator. Recently sold their global business, but now is focusing in India. I guess you all guess who that is. But I was in a conversation. So they themselves in India, more than half of their revenues today come from non-transaction services, even though they are predominantly known for transaction payment processing.
They've completely shifted the business model.
Yes. Everyone is moving there. If you don't, somebody will do it, and then you'll only play catch up. So I think figure out how you all can do it within your structures and constructs, but I think it's important to kind of look at this business model outside of per transaction fee only.
And Riza, your thoughts?
Just have to agree very strongly with 2 points that Zubin raised. Number one, I think the participation of non-bank institutions is crucial. If you look at probably the most developed RTP markets on the continent, it's Nigeria. And no matter what fintech app or bank service you're using, it comes with a virtual bank account to allow you to interoperate with every other bank account. It's like Oprah's in the central bank giving away bank accounts to everybody. It's pretty amazing. And then the issue of cost, I think, is also a really big one with regards to PayShap, especially for some of the low to medium ticket items. For example, if I ask you, Mpo, to dash me something small, the minimum you can send me is like 10,000 or 20, right? And PayShap may not be the most appropriate rail for that, right? So like you really lowering the cost, increasing the transaction bands, I think that's something that could be pretty instrumental. And then on the merchant side, I still think there is a really big opportunity there. South Africa is a leader in e-commerce continentally for sub-Saharan Africa, and you see a lot of activity that's happening online with cards. And while cards work extremely well, I think there is still an opportunity for a different mechanism that perhaps doesn't carry as much risk for e-commerce transactions. That could actually be a really, really big driver of growth.
And what I'm picking up, and I'll ask you the last question really, which is coming from here in the last 60 seconds, is that we really need to get on top of the shift from a transfer to a payment. Get that merchant use cases going, irrespective of the current deployment or whether it's request to pay or is the current ecosystem. We got to have to include the broader payments ecosystem. So the fintech ecosystem is a big driver for volumes, and of course the common experience and price. I think those are the things and the piece of work that lies ahead for the collective team who's involved in this rail commercialization. So maybe as a last question, and if you can cover that in sort of 30 to 45 seconds, it's really, there is a lot of talk around cross-border integration, interoperability, and of course domestic interoperability of various payment rails. Just your thoughts there in the context of what's next for real-time payments. Card is what it is because the network. Are we going to see a similar network effect in real-time payments? There's 60 implementations starting to connect together.
Yeah.
Is that maybe and then Zubin will close from there.
I think I see a lot of interesting work that the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System is doing out of Cairo. I think that's going to be a fundamentally critical rail over the next decade or so. But the real issue, I think, on cross-border in Africa is that as African countries, we don't really trust each other's currencies. Like we don't know, we want to hold dollars. Right? Like, this is Malawi kwacha, I don't know.
I don't want it.
Right?
What's that?
So that's not a technology problem, right? And I think if we can start to have exotic African currencies having more functional utility in some of our markets, like I would love to be able to spend my Ugandan shillings here. That's where we could see more demand for this type of infra. But as long as it's still very dollarized as it is today, I don't expect that we're going to see a lot of cross-border interoperability just yet.
Okay. Fair point. Zubin?
No, so I think again, South Africa, I was looking at the average cost of remittance, and it's way above the global average, which in my view is still high, which is 6%, and I think yours is around 8%, which is high. So I think there's big potential there, number one. Number two is, I think I go back with your point saying, I think the technical solution fix is easy. I mean, there are options, there are models, but I think it's governments coming together, agreeing bilaterally. It's more of a diplomatic arrangement that first needs to happen, and they need to handshake and agree that we will cross currencies or we will exchange, and this is the model how it will work. And then I think the tech follows. The tech is not difficult, and I believe there are two schools. One is having a central one rail where everyone connects to, and you have a standard set of rules to interconnect, and the other is the bilateral. Like South Africa will connect separately with every country, and I believe going forward, especially with what happened with the war and how systems were cut off and all, I think the bilateral route is what will in the end work. So yes, it'll a little more work, a lot more diplomacy, a lot more conversations to be able to tie bilateral conversations. And once you fix up one, start that corridor. Then move to the next and start that corridor. Set up your mechanisms, how you'll exchange liquidity. Central banks will have to come together. How will you manage KYC? Will funds directly go and hit once a beneficiary is registered? Get that AML, CFT issue sorted and agreed, and I think then I think cross-border is not an issue. It's tech is, I think, an easy fix.
Cool. Gentlemen, thank you very much. I do hope that you left everyone with a lot to think about, and I saw my team was taking a lot of notes, so we've got lots of work ahead of us. So thank you very much, and thank you everyone.
Thank you.
Jason?
Hey.